Mm. Mm. Get the one fucking regulator. And then they found my fucking video for whatever stupid fucking reason.
this idea of a highly sensitive person may really put a person at risk for getting into a narcissistic relationship. And what happens if a person who is a highly sensitive person ends up in a narcissistic relationship? This concept of the highly sensitive person has been written about extensively by someone named Dr. Elaine Aron, and you can check out her website for more information. She's really an expert on this. Her last name is Aron. Dr. Aron and others believe that the highly sensitive style reflects a personality style that is observed in a person who is more impacted by environmental stimulation of all kinds. The criteria for highly sensitive personhood includes things like throughout their lives they have been called hypersensitive by other people. They themselves feel like they've always been overstimulated by their senses, for example, sight, smell. They can be easily upset by seeing violence in the media or movies or other disturbing imagery. They will really try to avoid stress and stressful situations, get really overwhelmed when there's a lot to do, be overwhelmed by large groups of people, identify themselves as being emotional, that's how they talk about themselves, and many times being regarded as introverted or shy, having higher than normative pain sensitivity, being very attuned to the subtle reactions of those around you, or even subtle variations in the environment, noticing something has changed or moved, being very detail oriented, avoiding making mistakes, and trying to please other people. So these are the kinds of things that Dr. Aron and others have described as a highly sensitive person. Now, this list obviously shares lots of overlaps with other styles that can include terms such as introvert, having sensory processing issues, being somatic, being dependent, having issues with perfectionism, being an empath, or even being anxious. However, Dr. Aron and others argue that this style represents a very specific kind of personality that is not introversion or neuroticism or dependency. I actually have people in my life who likely meet these criteria for being a highly sensitive person, and they're actually deeply empathic, quite self-aware. And I have to say, out of love and respect, I try to do the workarounds with them, suggest activities that make sense, monitor the environment to sort of make things, at least in my world, easier for them. But when I think about what would or has happened to them when they got into, or if they got into a relationship with a narcissistic person, I actually shudder to think about what would happen to them. So as you read this list, you may already be rubbing your head and feel worried for someone who has this highly sensitive personality style. Perhaps it's you who has a highly sensitive style. Getting into a relationship with a narcissistic person, because you're absolutely right if you're thinking this, it's not going to end well. Well, what could go wrong if a highly sensitive person got in a relationship with a narcissist? Let's break it down. Highly sensitive people are actually vulnerable to narcissistic relationships because of their empathy and their commitment to going out of their way to get it right. And they may be less likely to spot red flags as to try to get it right. They're more focused on getting it right than what's not right. Or they may gaslight themselves and feel that, here I am again being too emotional, instead of seeing the narcissistic behavior within a relationship as being a problem. Within the narcissistic relationship with a highly sensitive person, there is so much more potential for gaslighting. For the narcissistic person to actually call a highly sensitive person out as overly sensitive. And it's a label that a highly sensitive person may actually agree with, even when the highly sensitive person is having an appropriate reaction to what is real emotional abuse. The risk of sort of overwhelm for a person with a highly sensitive style means that on the side of the narcissist, there's a greater risk of them being met with contempt, dismissiveness, anger, and even more gaslighting about a highly sensitive person feeling overwhelmed or feeling overwhelmed by stress. The inherent lack of empathy observed in narcissism means that the narcissistic person is not going to be empathic to the environmental sensitivities of a highly sensitive person, but will actually harness them as a place of shaming the highly sensitive person. More often than not, the narcissistic person will invalidate the highly sensitive person as crazy or make other disparaging comments about their mental health. The empathic elements of the highly sensitive person, especially being highly attuned to the emotions around them, can be quite treacherous, as you could imagine, in a narcissistic relationships. The sort of ups and downs, the labile shifting emotions in a narcissistic relationship can all mean that the hyper monitoring style of a highly sensitive person who finds themselves in one of these relationships will be absolutely exhausting. The constant shape shifting and eggshell walking that's required by a narcissistic relationship is bound to be more pronounced in a relationship such as this. Now, narcissistic relationships are difficult for everyone. It's the nature of the beast and really difficult for everyone. There is no personality style out there that would make any of us immune from the challenges of these relationships. But an highly sensitive person who is much more attuned to the nuances of the environment and the people in it who are more impacted by stress and are more likely to try and avoid mistakes and maybe even over cater to the needs of those in the environment, these folks are in a particularly precarious position. The tendency of narcissistic people to weaponize what they perceive as the weaknesses of other people means that their vulnerabilities, for example, things like being sensitive, or the difficulties that highly sensitive people have watching violence, or their, their exquisite emotional awareness, those things will be exploited, mocked, and shamed. The greatest risk is that the highly sensitive person may get stuck in a really unhealthy cycle of trying to please the narcissistic person. The narcissistic person continuing to dominate and invalidate the highly sensitive person, and the highly sensitive person trying even harder instead of saying, this is not healthy. If you are a highly sensitive person, it would be very important to work in your own therapy or whatever form of growth work you're doing about how to safely choose a partner, to give yourself permission to set boundaries that feel safe, to understand your personality style, and to not pathologize or gaslight yourself. To have trusted people that you can turn to and share your feelings and experiences, as well as use therapy as a place to share and process these experiences. Again, it's difficult for any of us to navigate a relationship with someone who invalidates us and insults us and manipulates us. But if your personality style as a highly sensitive person makes you even more vulnerable to the machinations and manipulations of narcissism, it's really important to be aware of what narcissism is about and how best to protect yourself. I want to put in a clarifying statement here. Some of you are saying, but hey, Dr. Ramani, you're the one who says that narcissistic people are the ones who are often very sensitive in the face of criticism. So let me be clear on this. This construct of the highly sensitive person is a very specific personality style that Dr. Aaron built up. The sensitivity to criticism in narcissistic people is sort of a different game. And I almost think it's better that I call it reactivity in the face of criticism in narcissism. Because people who are narcissistic, if anyone gives them feedback, if anyone even gives them a small critique, if anyone tells them that something about them is not perfect, narcissistic people tend to be very hyper reactive to that feedback, and angrily so. You would not see that in a highly sensitive person. So it may be more of that sort of that hypersensitivity is more of a hyperreactivity we see in narcissism. So that's a sort of a different issue. And the other thing is that the narcissistic people may be very reactive to feedback and criticism, but they have no trouble dishing it out. You would definitely not see that in the highly sensitive person framework. I hope that clarifies it. I know more than a few of you over the years have actually sent in this question about the issue of the highly sensitive person, and I hope that clarifies it. Thanks again.
Fine.
Is characterized by manipulation, deceit, aggression, and lack of empathy. Sociopaths tend to engage in risky behavior and violate laws at the expense of themselves or others. These individuals may have a compromised moral compass and are usually perceived as unethical, immoral, and irresponsible. Despite the media's glamorization and inaccurate portrayal of sociopaths, most of them are not serial killers. They can be CEOs, lawyers, business owners, politicians, Wall Street traders, housewives, doctors. They could be anyone. So, here are 7 signs that someone you know may be a sociopath. Number 1. Sociopaths lack empathy. Antisocial personality disorder is categorized along with other personality disorders, such as borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. One defining trait is a lack of empathy. Typically, they do not feel any remorse or guilt as they have trouble understanding other people's emotions. As a result, they may emotionally hurt those around them and have difficulty maintaining relationships. They can come across as cold, harsh, callous, and unfeeling. With training and therapy, it is possible for some people with ASPD to feel love and empathy. They usually develop empathy towards a select group, namely their children, parents, or partners. Number 2. They're manipulative. Sociopaths have a talent for manipulating others. They're opportunistic and highly ambitious individuals. As such, they rely on emotional or physical manipulation to get what they want. Some techniques that they use to manipulate others are gaslighting, lying, flattery, bullying, and threats. Number 3. They are dangerously charming. Charm is part of the game. Sociopaths use their charisma and charm to attract others. specifically those who are more vulnerable than themselves. They will feign concern or kindness to get people to believe them and establish a sense of trust. That way, it becomes easier to manipulate them. Number 4. Sociopaths are ill-tempered and impulsive. Though those with ASPD usually resort to manipulation, they are also more impulsive and ill-tempered. They're prone to engaging in risky and illegal behavior at the expense of themselves or others. Different factors affect the development of this trait, but being around people who encourage and condone violence make it more likely for someone with ASPD to be violent themselves. Exposure to domestic abuse and animal cruelty are some early manifestations of violent behavior in a person who has ASPD. Number 5. The extreme relationships. If a sociopath manages to establish a relationship, they're most likely to be very possessive over the other person, especially if it's a romantic relationship. Sociopaths see people as a means to an end, whether it's to glean information from or for emotional fulfillment, or for money. They use people to obtain something and feel threatened when someone tries to insert themselves. Number 6. They're narcissistic. ASPD can occur with other personality disorders, namely narcissism. It's important to note that not all narcissists are sociopaths, but most sociopaths can be narcissists. Sociopaths develop a superiority complex and use this complex to justify the way they treat others. Because sociopaths do not feel remorse, they do not normally apologize. And number 7, they find enjoyment in others' suffering. Though individuals with antisocial personality disorder do not show empathy, there are some rare exceptions. Sadistic antisocials use empathy to experience their target's suffering and to derive pleasure from it. Do any of these signs describe someone you know? Let us know down in the comments below. If this video helped you, and you think it could help someone else too, give it a like and share. The studies and references used are listed in the description below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell icon for more scientific videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
We've covered how to spot a psychopath or sociopath before, but we've never gone this in-depth on the clinical diagnosis behind them, antisocial personality disorder. Welcome to the MedCircle series, Antisocial Personality Disorder, Psychopaths, Sociopaths, and How to Spot Them.
I loved you in this series more than maybe I would ever do.
I'll be back.
The reason, though, is because I think you were more brutally honest than you.
Listen, I'll tell you this. There are some things we talk about on MedCircle where there's a lot of pain and suffering for the person experiencing it. I think of our series on anxiety disorders. I think of our series on borderline personality. These are people experiencing a lot of subjective discomfort. This work, not so much subjective discomfort, they're causing a lot of discomfort for other people.
Well, and that's the thing.
And some people say, but they had a tough start. I said, most people have a tough start, don't go on things. And the utter lack of insight, the utter lack of commitment to change, and the fact that our culture somehow reveres and celebrates, it's like, it doesn't matter how you want to get as long as you win. That kind of thinking is becoming more and more important. And people with this pattern of antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, sociopathy, all these variants, they're advantaged in that situation, which means that there's less empathy at the time, that there's less value on things that we're screaming and connected and have each other's back, and it's just like every man for himself, every woman for herself, rather than a sense of community. I psychologist. So I was willing to be brutally honest.
Well, and when I say brutally honest, it's just your tone.
I know.
It's not you going, I don't mean that. People will see when they watch the series. It's just you telling it like it is. And that's when you deal with reality.
Well, I'm never going to be your warm and fuzzy psychologist. I am not. That's not true. I get warm and fuzzy. I do get warm and fuzzy, and I'm actually an extraordinarily warm and fuzzy person. As long as it's reciprocal and mutual. But what I don't like doing is giving people sort of artificial feel-good moments that actually set them up for a real fall. I'd rather give them a real deal, even if the real deal is uncomfortable, and then let them make their decisions accordingly. That's how I engage in consultation, how I go, in clinical work, and how I teach students, all of that. I can't guarantee that somebody armed with that reality will necessarily make the healthy decision, but I at least can rest assured that I gave them the information.
Do you think that's why viewers respond so positively to you?
Do they respond positively? I don't know.
I get a lot of comments on my social media and my email. My email's not necessarily a lot of comments. I get a lot of comments. And I would say they're just really your answers, your metaphors, your big actionable advices in a way that's changing their lives. I think
That means a lot to me. You know what? I think that when you're an undergraduate teacher for so many years, they're getting more and more inattentive all the time, so try to keep their attention. You do become a teacher, and it makes me so happy to hear that you make this content and you know everyone is going to see it. I have to say, 10 years ago, when I started working in this area of more toxic and difficult relationships, if you know, narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic, all of that, I was kind of a label about myself and really thinking, oh, reach out that for people, and that would be I never dreamed that the world would take the changes it did. Nothing compared to this. It was like you were studying some weird, obscure disease that nobody cared about. One day it became and there it was. And so I think that what devastates me is that this answer is the loss of human potential. I see when people get sunk into relationships where they're devalued, invalidated, negated, and dehumanized, and wronged and abused. Those people are trying to themselves and themselves and and I see how much people lose, how much of their words get to come to the world, they don't think their words are worthy of their efforts and their work. And so it's really about educating them what happened to them so that they can take their lives back. That's my personal mission. If it's reaching the viewers, I'm so happy to hear that. But I enjoy myself.
I know it is, and I hope and think that this series will do it on an even larger level. I'm going to ask you this question, and I want you to answer right now. I want you to think of your favorite moment of the series we just shot. And that can't be me. I am not a moment. You create the moments, okay? And while you think of that, I just want to tell viewers what they can expect throughout this series. And remember, you can go to medschool.com and subscribe to watch this series. We talk about cluster B personality disorders, what they need to know about that. There are 4 personality disorders that have cluster B. We talk about that. That completely separate from the series, but we're from today. We talk about antisocial personality disorders, psychopaths and sociopaths, what makes them different, how they are similar when they get misinterpreted as narcissism, other disorders that are often misdiagnosed, or co-occurring disorders. We talk about the causes of psychopaths and sociopaths. Are they born? Are they made? Is it both? We talk about how to spot the signs in a psychopath. We talk literally the questions you can ask, or the signs that you can look out for when you're talking to someone, both for psychopaths and sociopaths. And then we go on to talk about whether or not antisocial personality disorder, sociopathy, and psychopathy can be cured, and what treatments are available for those people. And then we go through what supporters do if you're dealing with the significant other who has an antisocial personality disorder. If a coworker, if a boss, if your child does, what you can do. Actual big takeaway piece of advice from Dr. Tommy. So this is a long series, and we covered a lot of stuff. Those are good moments.
I always welcome the opportunity to see if we can ever get a higher topic. And one thing I really thought we were able to make in this series is that when people, when we're talking about relationships with psychopaths or sociopaths and people with antisocial personality disorder, that the writing was on the wall from the beginning. And that if this would stop someone entering or staying in one of these relationships, or if they can impart that wisdom to someone else, that not getting in the first place is the best prevention of all. And the sense that sometimes the sort of the desperate rush to get married, to be in a relationship, and to let yourself get blinded to patterns that are not good for you. These folks often take advantage of that vulnerability, the smoothness, the glibness, so many people out there in the world think they don't deserve a relationship. So they'll enter the wrong circle who doesn't treat them well. And I think that everyone deserves to be loved and loved well. And that if it's anything less than that, to give yourself permission to step
to step away and to step into something
Yes.
that is
Yes.
more valuable.
Yes, and to learn to really value themselves. I'm not going to say love yourself, it sounds so cliche, but to learn to value yourself. Because when you value yourself, you treat yourself with value, then you tend to be able to keep up the gates so that people who don't have don't give you that. You've got to be able to gatekeep. Ain't nobody else can do that for you. You've got to be able to gatekeep. You are precious. Not let you tap yourself.
My big takeaway was that or at least lead you to those better decisions at the time. And we talk about how to actually apply that. It's easy to say, that's easily said, but we really talk about actual steps that you can take and what that looks like when you are mindful, so that you can take your life, and if it's already really good, make it great. And if it's not good, make it good.
Yes,
Because you said it in the series, I want people to live their optimal life.
best lives. And the best, and just to honor that becomes, to actualize themselves, open themselves up to potential and possibility. So many people feel that they don't have the right to that. It doesn't have to be anything grandiose. You could just simply be in life in a serene way, in a peaceful way. You don't have to follow anyone else's way. And I think that, unfortunately, when people get into these kinds of toxic relationships, it's often because they're not living authentically, not living on their inner voices. Because I think that those kind of people may not give themselves permission to walk away. If it walks like a duck, it cracks like a duck. Or a psychopath.
It's a psychopath. The next book. That resonates so much with me. I actually get chills when it resonates so much. I know you will love this series. You can go to medcircle.com, become a subscriber, and access this series, access other series on a variety of mental health topics that matter to you. Your education and this education makes a difference in your life. So take the time, go to medcircle.com and subscribe. And thank you so much for taking your mental health seriously.
To parents, the public person, and this really cruel, invalidating, malevolent, horrible person that would come home, and they'd note the dichotomy, how seamlessly the parent would go between those two worlds, and so and put their child through unrealistic kinds of expectations. So people, it's not like a person wakes up at 30 and says, "Oh, Dad was a psychopath,"
Is there such thing as a self-aware psychopath?
The funny thing about psychopaths is I don't even think they get mad if you call them psychopaths, because they don't care what anybody thinks of them. So if you go up and laugh it off, it wouldn't be like, even a narcissist gets super defensive But a psychopath's like, you want to call me a psychopath? Call me a psychopath.
So that's how they respond, but do they think
They're
that
not.
I am a psychopath?
Yeah, no, they're not affected by the evaluations or labels placed on them by other people. What they don't like,
Do they recognize that they are a psychopath?
maybe, yeah. Yeah, they might. In some cases, they might. And if anything, it's like there's a sadistic greed.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? Like they may recognize it.
Like how cool that I am.
Like how cool. Like I'm a psychopath and I'm getting away with it. Or I'm a psychopath and look how much money I'm making. You know, it's almost like if you, I don't know, it's like finding a bag of money on the street dropped by an armored truck, and like no one's around, and I'm picking this up and I'm walking down the street and I'm getting away with this. Like their whole life is about getting away with stuff. So if anything, that psychopath might even be like a badge of honor. But I don't. Again, I think they're impervious to the criticisms of other people. That's where they're different than the narcissists. The narcissists hate being criticized.
Right.
The psychopaths don't.
What are we not talking about when it comes to identifying a psychopath?
I think that with a psychopath, it is really about looking for inconsistencies. Inconsistency in mood, inconsistency in life history, inconsistency in their stories. The problem is, we so want to believe when we meet someone new that their stories are real. I've just met this super cool person, that we make the puzzle pieces fit, even when they don't. I tell people, be a cynic. When the dates don't line up, recreate it. Listen, Google's making some of this stuff possible too. It's not like I want everyone to, like I said, go out there and play like a junior detective. But if you're being isolated from anybody who knows anything about this person, pay attention to them. You know, before you entirely buy their recreation of the events, look for things that don't add up. They have this huge job, like they're so successful, but they don't have enough money to get through the month. But can you help me out this month? Like next month, the big payout's going to come out. So I'll get everything covered from then on in. You know, anything that feels like a hustle is probably a hustle. We are seeing that there are programs like, for example, prison transition programs and other programs working with more incarcerated antisocial personality disorder groups that have found some utility in some social skills training, group therapies, some work with cognitive behavioral therapies. There has been some good work there. You know, listen, at the end of the day, it's like, you know, the old joke of how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? One that needs to want to change. It's the same thing with antisocial personality disorder. You know, this person has to need to want to change, and you know, you may or may not have that. I have to be honest with you, it's more of those slick, glib, charming, almost if you want to call them white collar psychopaths, that are, you're going to get absolutely nothing. I mean, I think there's absolutely no chance of change there. I think actually in the criminal populations, you may be able to do some level of job training, social skills training, meaning and purpose focused work. And I actually would put my bet on the incarcerated population more than I would on the sort of the slick, the slick, sophisticated, successful group of psychopaths, quite frankly, because there's almost no motivation for change. They're getting rewarded for it.
That's right. They're in their world, they're killing it. They're killing it, and the world is telling them they're killing it too.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe cured is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Could a person who is psychopathic, could they at least get to a point where they're not breaking the rules?
I mean, that's obviously the goal, and that's the goal of, you know, rehabilitation after prison, and you know, that kind of thing, is that there is no recidivism. When we try to avoid recidivism is where we're trying to prevent a person from committing crimes again. But you know, criminal behavior or illegal behavior is just only one part of what we see in antisocial personality disorder. We're also seeing violation of ethics or morality or social norms. So for example, somebody who is antisocial personality or psychopathy is very likely to cheat on a romantic partner if they have one. They're going to probably keep doing that because they're really almost immune to any sense of morality. And so that's not going to change, which can make it very difficult to maintain any kind of trusting relationship with somebody like that. So I think that some of the treatment targets, maybe in terms of illegal behavior, they may be willing to bring some of that hustle, if you will, to more legal behavior, but even then, you'll sort of see that their tendency is going to want to take more ethical shortcuts.
What does the treatment actually look like for a psychopath?
You know, a lot of it is, again, it's cognitive behavioral. It's challenging their beliefs and changing them, their beliefs and thoughts, in hope of changing their behavior. That's really what you're trying to do, right? And so that's where you're sort of pushing back on your cognitions, pushing back on their schemas, on their sense of how the world works. You're trying to enhance their sense of empathy. You know, to really help them focus on this is how people are being hurt, especially if it's the kind of it's not like person on person crime, violent crime, something that feels more remote. That to help them sort of see that this is hurting somebody else and the people around them. Now, in a person who's really a cold, stone cold psychopath, they don't care. So like, I don't care if I'm hurting someone. It doesn't matter to me. And so if that's the case, how are you going to make change there? I don't think something I'm doing is wrong. Like somebody tells me tomorrow, like it's wrong to turn off my bedroom light when I sleep, I'm like, what? Why is that a problem?
That's a really good way
Yeah.
to put that.
Mhm.
That's how far it is.
Yeah.
But what do you mean? I gotta take $100 million.
Yeah.
So this is what
I'm gonna do it. You know, this is how I'm gonna do it, and no one's gonna stop me. Or it's a game. Again, I'm gonna bring up the Bernie Madoff case because he's sort of like a real textbook kind of a psychopathic, antisocial personality sort of person. In some ways, it's almost like it was gamesmanship. At some point, how much money does one person need?
Well, and it isn't that the
Right. It's gamesmanship. Exactly. That's all it was, and it felt like that's what it was, despite literally so many people's lives being destroyed by his decisions. It absolutely didn't even seem to. It was the game was more important than the other people, and that's what it is. They are players who really don't care.
So someone's watching this. I doubt they're psychopathic.
No.
Like on a relationship with somebody
Or family members.
or they are likely going to be advised to go seek therapy for themselves. In that therapy session, what did they ask the therapist? What I want to have happen to them is like they don't have to go to 5 therapy sessions to figure out what is a psychopath, what all those things that you're educating them on, and giving them the tools to ask the therapist so that maybe in the first section they can make a ton of a gain.
It depends on the relationship with the psychopath. Is this your child? Is this your coworker? Is this your husband? You know, because obviously the nature of the relationship is going to have a lot of bearing on what you need to know. For example, if it's your child, the question a lot of parents are going to have is, am I responsible for this?
We'll go into the whole child thing in our next video.
Right.
So let's assume that this is for a love,
So you mean like a part,
a
a
romantic.
romantic part? Is it possible he can change? Because he keeps telling me he will. We have kids together. Can I expect that he's going to be a decent co-parent if we have kids? Should I be scared? You know, I keep giving him second chances, but it never works out. Why not? You know, is it possible to change? Those are the kinds of questions that somebody should probably ask. And you know, I wonder if that person has any expertise whatsoever in psychology or antisocial personality, if they're going to be able to give you some straight answers on that. Like I said, these people are not made for long-term intimate relationships. They're not.
And what if somebody's like, what if somebody's in a position where their partner has all the money, they have nothing else to consider, and they have 5 kids? And they come to a therapist and they say, you're telling me he's not going to change, and you're telling me to leave without leaving.
Therapists won't tell you to leave. I wouldn't tell you.
Okay, then they're saying this is going to be really tough. And that person says, I want to stay in a relationship. What's your response to that?
Then I said, look at the history of what it's been like so far. That's how it's going to keep being. Okay? He has not been listening to you. He's not going to stop. He has been cheating on you. He's going to continue. He's been disrespecting you. That's going to keep going. Like everything you're seeing, I said, at least you already have the roadmap. Expect nothing. Expect nothing.
Do you help them with outreach?
Things like continuing, if they can, continue to stay in therapy, group therapy. I do ensure that people, women in particular, who have relationships with men who have antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, have access to domestic violence resources because that's not an uncommon pattern in these relationships. Encourage them to cultivate some of their own interests encourage them to cultivate friendships, and their partner will probably try to isolate them from those friendships, but even if it's online communities. Um, and I do want to tell Med Circle listeners, the guidance we're giving right now is not meant to serve a person who's in a violent relationship. If you are in a relationship where you or other children or other dependent adults in your environment are in danger, you must seek help immediately. You must seek domestic violence services, law enforcement, and keep in mind if you're researching those resources online on a computer, make sure you clear out your cache every time, because it's not unusual in most relationships for a partner to go through and search everything you search. It's that level of control. So, I do want listeners to understand that what we're talking about is situations where it has not escalated to violence, financial abuse, things that are pretty abject risk. This is not a substitute for the guidance and needs in that kind of a situation. And it can go there. And with psychopaths, not uncommon.
Is creating an exit strategy for the relationship ever part of it?
It is a part of it. Now, unfortunately, this is where you start sadly getting sometimes into the world of restraining orders and moving for custody hearings. If the antisocial personality pattern has more financial resources than you, they may try to crush you in court. They will be able to charm the judge. They will be able to charm the attorneys. They'll be able to charm the custody evaluators. I have seen these things go really, really badly for people. People losing custody of their children, people getting limited custody. Sometimes the psychopathic parent wants custody of that child, not because they're interested in the child, but to stick it to the other parent, which is not good for anyone in this situation. So I do tell people, you need a plan. You need a strategy. You need supports. And after all that, it still may not go your way. And I wish I could give people like a really sugar-coated version of this, but people say, well, the judge is going to see right through him. Not necessarily.
Well, I'm glad you're not giving a sugar
Yeah.
version, because what we're doing here is giving the reality,
It's a reality.
of mental health.
Mhm.
And the reality on this topic is what
It
you
is.
have just described. And let's not move away from reality because it makes us feel good in the moment.
Right.
Let's lean into it so we can work within the realms of what's real
Yeah.
and make the best decisions as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And I think you've given a lot of our viewers actionable steps to take.
Absolutely, but you have to. These relationships can become dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's also, listen, I'll tell you this: if a person's psychopathic or antisocial personality partner is really high functioning, they are like the head of a company or some sort of like really high up in a political structure or something like that, the world may not believe that. And that's even more horrifying. And in fact, women who are more wealthy are often less likely to seek out domestic violence resources, which is not an uncommon situation in these relationships. This is a dark space. And again, I think some people may be watching now and scratching their head and say, how did a person not see this? How did they get in the first place? Listen, a lot of flash, a lot of sizzle. Everyone around you is like, oh my gosh, he's so generous. He's so nice. Oh my God, he's flying all of us on this great vacation, or he's taking care of you, or he's actually, let's say you have a child, and he's offering to take care of the child too. That all looks really good to the world, and a lot of people don't stop under those circumstances to ask the right questions.
Well, that's a really good takeaway for people who know somebody who's in a relationship with a psychopath, to make sure you ask.
Yeah.
And when I sat down with Kevin Collins, who survived what normally would be a fatal jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, he really drove home the point of checking in with people, asking, how are you? Letting me not the, oh, hi there, how are you? Good. That's the surface. And that was the other thing. But really going, you're in a relationship with this person. How is it? How is it?
Yeah. People don't often like to pull back that curtain. I don't know whether it's because they don't want to know the answer, or whether they feel like they're prying, that it feels impertinent or something like that. Especially I think even if you don't know someone now, it's okay to say you met them. How are you? Like, is it good? Is it a good relationship? I think people are often like, why would you even ask me that? I think it's an interesting question, because if it's a great relationship and it's healthy, you'd say, I'm so fortunate, like it's a really, really happy relationship. At a minimum, it would make anyone stop and think.
Dr. Ame, explain why first a child cannot be diagnosed as a psychopath.
Because it is a pattern, diagnostic kind of a label that's safe for people over the age of 18. Antisocial personality disorder is not diagnosed until somebody is over 18. But in children, we can look for patterns that really conform to delinquency. These can be milder patterns like truancy, cheating on school assignments, to more severe ones like physically or sexually assaulting peers. It could be things like torturing animals, setting fires. All of these behaviors, if you have, I think, 3 or more of these kinds of behaviors, they qualify a child to be diagnosed with something called conduct disorder. Now, these kids typically get handled through school and juvenile justice systems. They may be placed in special school settings. They may be sent to sort of special boarding school settings if your family has the money. Sadly, some of them may end up in juvenile detention settings as well, where we know they're grouped in with other kids doing these things. So sometimes they actually learn more criminality in those settings. So if you're noticing these patterns of a child that bullying, any of those things, you want to act swiftly, early and intensively. I think part of the reason this is always so tricky is that sometimes it's kids being kids. It's that childhood play, those childhood fights. It's just kids being kids. It's boys being boys, and that's often used as a defense of something that people could get ahead of. But it's also not that simple. Nowadays, we have a new issue with kids, and that's their online activity. You may not have a kid who's going to school and making trouble there, but what you might have is a child who's really getting into some dark online spaces, whether through social media or even websites and sort of social networks that aren't as commonly used. You want to watch their video game play. A lot of the research associated with video game play or video game play and violent behavior is really good. You're not seeing consistent patterns there. Is your child locked up in a room all day playing these video games by themselves? Are they socially isolated? How do they treat their siblings? Are they interactive at family gatherings, or are they distant and remote? So there's a lot of places you can witness this child. And there's a lot of ways. It's not just the acting out. Some of it is also that extreme social withdrawal. You're their parent. They don't get cybersecurity. You get to go through their stuff.
And that's a good thing.
Yes, it is a good thing.
Like, if you were at the position as a parent, when you feel like your kid is exhibiting some of these signs and symptoms, be happy that at least they're not 18. So that
You might be able to get it. You can take control. And a lot of parents, listen, a lot of these kids are more savvy in electronic spaces than their parents are. So they're able to, really bury things. And, they might be on websites and extreme websites that parents don't even know exist. So it's getting more and sometimes more and more challenging to monitor all of these kinds of situations where kids could be going down some really perilous places. At that point, you can really only engage in early prevention. Like I said, parts of the schools and parts of people where this is a specialization. And at that point, hope for the best.
I talk to so many of our groups, and so it helps me to learn what helps them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they've shared with me is that when they're watching videos like this, and you just look at if they're isolating, if they interact with people at family functions, and you went through this list. Go back in this video, play those responses again that Dr. Romney just gave, and write down those questions, and over the next week, 2 weeks, a month, write down what you're observing, because we get so caught up in getting the kids to school, getting to work, packing lunches, we miss the parents.
We don't always pay attention.
No, and so if you write that down and you actually take the time to look and write out, then you can take something to a therapist and say, this is what I've been observing, right? So we have some record here. And we start to expedite the process of therapy so that they get as much correct information as possible.
And one thing that's also tricky, Kyle, is, and as a parent I can understand this, is some parents just are in a place of denial. They don't want to even let themselves go there. It's terrifying to think not only could something be wrong, but your child potentially could be dangerous to other people. And parents think, well, maybe it'll be different in the new school. Maybe it'll be different next year.
This is a
Maybe this is a phase. Exactly. Maybe it is. But better that you do explore it instead of saying 2 years later, I wish I had started something back then and started trying to get to the bottom of this. It's hard. If a child is oppositional enough, even getting it into a mental health practitioner may get you nowhere. But I think for parents to at least know that you gave it a shot, the more resources you throw at something early, the more likely you are to have good outcome.
Yes. What do you wish more parents would incorporate?
I think I wish more parents would be willing to have emotional conversations with their kids early. I have to say that we're having a real crisis of emotional expression in our culture. And I think sadly it's concentrated in women and boys, where we're not giving them permission to talk about their feelings. We view vulnerability as weakness. We view talking about feelings as weakness. We feminize it, and that's supposed to make it weak too.